Hello, good day. My name is Akintayo Olayinka. I'm presenting or leading a lecture on pre-Islamic history, culture, and Islamic philosophy. Today, I'm continuing with the pre-Islamic history, and I want to examine another scholar who has presented his own work on economic and maritime in the pre-Islamic Arabia, and his name is Al-Garou. Al-Garou. Al-Garou presented his work in the Journal of Arts and Social Sciences. Al-Garou is relevant to the economy of the pre-Islamic Arabia. His writing is on rise and fall of maritime hubs in pre-Islamic Arabia, and his work is published in the Journal of Arts and Social Sciences, as I said earlier on. The journal observes a double-blind peer review for its publication to enhance its credibility, and explained the meaning of double-blind peer review in my previous seminar or presentation. This journal in particular, the Journal of Arts and Social Sciences, is a refereed scholarly journal published by the College of Arts and Social Sciences at Sultan Qaboos University, Muscat in Oman. The journal publishes 3 issues a year and welcomes research of current interest for international scholars in both English and Arabic in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. All articles are subjected to a double-blind peer review process, implying that 2 other scholars will have studied the journal article before it is published, and those 2 scholars will not know the author of the article, and they will pass their comments to the editor, and the editor will make a decision whether the article worth being published or whether the author should make some corrections before the article is published. So we welcome Al-Garou into our seminar room today, and we want to engage him in conversation, academic conversation. So Al-Garou suggests the Arabian Peninsula plays significant roles in the civilization and maritime history. So when we want to study history of civilization and history of maritime, there is no way we will leave the Arabian Peninsula out of this discussion. Recognized within the regions are the Mesopotamia, Egypt, Phoenicia, and the ancient South Arabia, otherwise known as Yemen. So we're talking about the Arabian Peninsula. We think of many present-day countries. So in those days, they put them together as Arabian Peninsula, and at some point in history, the particular place is known as Mesopotamia. And then, of course, many people know Egypt. Egypt has been there for many centuries, and we know Phoenicia and also the the Yemen or South Arabia. All this area have water and rivers flowing, so there's no way we will talk about maritime industry and navigation without mentioning them. The Arabs, according to Al-Garu, are good. They are good at navigation. They are good at astronomy and sales of frankincense and myrrh. So it's time to pay attention to the economy of this time. Al-Garu further argues that there was also a notice of religious, political, and economic influence around the 4th century AD. So, if the trades that were flourishing in the pre-Islamic Arabia were include astronomy, includes navigation and travel, and sales of frankincense and myrrh. The question is, what did they use frankincense for? And what did they use myrrh for? As we continue, we notice that frankincense and myrrh were used for religious purposes, implying that religion was flourishing at some point in that part of the world. Flourishing in the sense that there are different types of religions, and we may not be able to figure out which is which, but at least those ones that have written documents, you can easily notice what they use the frankincense and myrrh for. In the Bible, in the New Testament, we read of how some wise people came during the birth of Jesus, after the birth of Jesus, and they gave him some gifts. They gave him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And hundreds of years later, the 4th century, that trade was still continuing. So economy was very important to them in those days. Trades, very important. Religion, very important. Politics, also very important to them in the pre-Islamic history of Arabia. So the countries Al-Garu mentioned are part of the current Arab world and was having a significant presence in those days. So it was very significant to them in those days. Those countries are very, very important. So let's say around 4th century, later as cited here, we think that all those things were still going on. The place was still flourishing. But we need to begin to look at if anything changed at all from 4th century till the time Islam arrived. As I said earlier on, frankincense and myrrh were there already, even at the time of Jesus. We saw it in a religious book in the Bible. 400 years later, as we record here today in Al-Garu's work, those two items were still being sold, also for religious purposes. So, after that, what happens from 4th century, just before Israel arrived, and before Islam arrived, and after Islam arrived, what were the things going on there? So those are the areas that we can study further and try to examine. The pre-Islamic Arabs thus had their economy around religious festivities, both selling and using frankincense Amer, as well as being good at sea navigation, traveling on the sea. Agaru did not fail to mention that when religions declined prior to the rise of Islam, the economic activities around the sales of frankincense and myrrh also declined, as well as tourism. Now, just before the arrival of Islam, there was this idea that the sales of frankincense declined, the sales of myrrh declined, religious tourism declined. So when those things were the use of those materials were declined, and people were not traveling as much as they used to travel because of religious reasons, it was at that time that Islam was about to come up. So we can see that religion flourished some hundreds of years before Islam. Just before Islam arrived, then there was decline in those activities, religious activities and tourism. The cause of the decline in religious activities prior to Islam should be accounted for in other academic and professional works in order to buttress Agaru's arguments. So we need to source more materials, source more academic works to cross-examine the cause of decline in the religious activities just before Islam came. According to Agaru, his work is very recent, 2018, paganism declined as Islam rose. Then maritime industry began to flourish again when Islam came in. It is, however, clear that the coming of Islam was significantly responsible for the decline or total decline of paganism in Mecca area of the Arabia. So if we are still trying to study history to find out the major cause of decline in religious activities before Islam came into the scene, we know for sure that there was conflict between Muhammad and the pagan Meccan people, or if I will use another word instead of paganism, some people don't want to use that word. Those who practice their indigenous religions, the Meccan indigenous religious practitioners, had conflict with Muhammad in those days. So definitely the decline of the indigenous religious practices in Mecca could be attributed to the conflict that they had with Muhammad. So that is the area that Agaru focused in his own work regarding pre-Islamic Arabian history. So we'll reflect more on that and see if we can source more information in that area. Let me quickly add another author known as Wybrandt, Wynbrandt, Wybrandt. James Wybrandt is a journalist and a writer. He wrote a work on a brief history of Saudi Arabia, and that work is worth considering. All the works I've been considering since the beginning of this seminar have been peer-reviewed articles, journal articles, academic scholarly works. This time around, I want to examine somebody else, James Wybrandt. This gentleman is a journalist and also a writer. But you ask me, why will I examine his work? I want to examine his work due to some reasons. The work is worth considering as it details and is strengthened by consulting many academic and practitioners. And I found the names of those academics and practitioners in his acknowledgement. So when I read the acknowledgement of Webbrandt's book, I found out that he has consulted many academic works and authors and actually submitted his manuscript to them for comments. So as a result, I felt I can go for his work also. And being a journalist, he could have done a good research in the contemporary Saudi Arabia and the environment, and could have consulted some other authorities and could have seen with his own eyes those things he wants to write about. And more importantly, many academics commented on his work as I've seen it in the acknowledgement. So I'd like to mention his work in my presentation. So I want to cite Weybrandt in this presentation. Similar to Al-Garou, Weybrandt argues for a decline in religion, leading to less use of frankincense and myrrh, coupled with locusts and droughts. The people resorted to raiding and warfare for living. This work I'm consulting was written in 2010 and is saying the same thing as Al-Garou, who did a very great academic search for his work. So it's not trying to bring it to our awareness that droughts and locusts also contributed to the decline in some of the activities that were going on during the pre-Islamic Arabian history. And also, of course, mention frankincense and myrrh also were not being used as much as they used to use them because of reduction or decline in religious activities. We can now cross-examine this to see that his work falls in line with other academic journals. But it's adding the idea of locusts and droughts also contributing to the decline in the economic activities of the time. And he now trying to bring another idea of raiding, that the people began to raid for survival, and some of them go on warfare for survival. This was the situation in the Arabia at the outset and early history of Islam. Considering the geography of the Arabian Peninsula, Weybrandt writes, Saudi Arabia occupies about 80% of the peninsula and is about 1/4 of the area of the continental United States. 7 sovereign states border the kingdom along its northern frontier. From west to east are Jordan, Iraq, and Kuwait. To the south and east are Yemen, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. The island nation of Bahrain lies off Saudi Arabia's coast, north of Qatar. It's on page 2 of his work. Now, Weybrandt is trying to present the geography of the area, and which also falls in line with the description of how peninsula looked like in the pre-Islamic Arabia. Trying to give us new names, the new names that those places are now being called, and the geography, how big the place is, and the exact location where they are. In addition, he writes, most of the Saudi Arabia is desert. Average annual precipitation is about 4 inches or 100 millimeters. Prevailing winds such as the southerly Kuf and the northwesterly Shama kick up severe dust storms. During the summer season, around mid-April and mid-October, daytime temperatures routinely reach 113 degrees Fahrenheit or 45 degrees Celsius. In the coastal regions, humidity is high, amplifying the effect of the heat. During the December and January, daytime temperatures reach about 59 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius, with nighttime temperatures in high elevations sometimes dipping below freezing. That's on page 5 and 6 of his work. Now, let us briefly engage Webrat in this discussion in what he has presented to us, trying to present the temperature, the geography, and how the place looks like. Talking of temperature, that the temperature reached about 45 degrees Celsius during what we will call summer in other parts of the world. I would liken that to be the temperature of even some parts of Nigeria, like northeast Nigeria in Maiduguri, or even Kano, northern part of Nigeria in Kano. The temperature could rise as much as 36 or 40 degrees Celsius, and even more, even as high as that 45 degrees Celsius. I recall there was a time in northeast Nigeria when I put the plastic cassette player in front of my car and shut the door and left. When I went back to the car, the cassettes we used in playing music in those days, so the cassette had expanded, so it could not key into cassette player anymore, just because sun was heating up the car and inside the car was hot, and the plastic expanded as if I put it in fire. So temperature could be high in many desert regions of the world. So I would say there are other places also we can, if you've been to other places, you can compare the temperature like that. When we talk of humidity to be high in some parts of the year, so there are other places also. So we can engage in this conversation. If you know places where humidity has been very high, we can engage in this conversation. And when the temperature is low as 15 degrees Celsius, so we can debate that and engage him in this conversation. There are places where the temperature will be minus 5, -6, especially here in England. The temperature could be lower than this. Even as I'm talking now, the temperature is low. So we can compare the climate of the pre-Islamic Arabia and the current Saudi Arabia with other parts of the world to have a kind of feeling of how the place really looked like. So the main thing I'm adding to my presentation is the inclusion of a journalist who has written a good work, presenting it to other scholars to comment before publication. So I will equally agree with his work to be presented for academic debate. This is how I will end this session, and look forward to continuing with our study and presentation on the pre-Islamic history, culture, and philosophy. Then we'll now move on to the real Islamic history, culture, and philosophy. I hope you have been engaged with this program and seminar, and looking forward to making more presentations in the near future. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day. God bless. Shalom. Salam.